So this is part of a webinar program called Grow My SME. It's been delivered by Winning Moves on behalf of the Humber Growth Hub. So thank you, like I say, for taking the time out to join us this afternoon. I'm going to be running through some slides, and so you don't have to have your camera on. You're more than welcome just to make notes, but do feel free to ask any questions as we go through. The subject for today's webinar is Claim Back Your Time with Effective Business Automation. So we're going to be looking at how automation can be used in your businesses, looking at simple, repetitive processes that you could perhaps apply some automation to, ultimately saving time and increasing efficiency. And ideally, we all want to claim back a little bit of our time. So quick introduction to myself. My name is Andrew Armitage. I'm the founder of a digital transformation agency. We're actually based over in Kendal on the other side of the coast. That means that we are building websites, planning marketing campaigns, supporting companies with adopting new technology, and sort of wrapping that in with their digital strategies as well. I also host a podcast called the Client Side Podcast, and I speak about digital marketing and websites at various events as well. And I'm actually a consultant on the Digital Tech Cumbria program, which is a similar program to, I imagine it's similar to the Grow My SME program, at least, just on the other side of the country. So I've been advising a number of companies around things like automation, marketing, and so on. I also have a book which is available, Holistic Website Planning. So that goes into quite a lot of detail about how websites can be part of your digital transformation, and that involves process which talks about data, internal process, strategy, technology, audiences, normalizing digital culture, content, and executing digital projects. So quite a broad array of different subjects, which all of which I think are really essential to develop into a digital first business, which, as the pandemic has shown, digital transformation has really accelerated over recent months. So enough about me. Today's agenda is looking something like this. We're going to talk about what automation actually is and why you might want to introduce automation into your business. We'll look at some of the things to look out for, because they can go wrong sometimes. We know technology is great when it works, but sometimes it can go wrong, and it's not necessarily the technology's fault that makes it go wrong either. So we'll look at some of those points. You can't really automate things without having a tech stack. That is the software and applications that you use in your business. So we'll look at the tech stack and what that is, and how you might then go about choosing some of those applications for your business systems. We'll have a bit of a break there, only a brief pause just for any Q&A, enough time for anyone just to grab a glass of water or something like that if they wish. And then we'll look at some actual examples of automation before we talk briefly about how you might go about planning some automations to apply yourselves. And then, as I said, finally, we'll close with a Q&A. So any questions that you have, by all means, make a note of them in the chat, or like I say, if you do want to interrupt me, then just unmute your microphone. That's probably going to be the easiest thing to do. It's not always easy as I'm looking at slides and thinking about what I'm saying, might not see people put their hands up. So do feel free just to interrupt if you wish. So hopefully that all sounds okay, and that matches the description of what you thought you were coming to hear. So we will move on and ask the question, what is automation all about? So the clue is obviously in the name. Automation is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. But the way that automation can be applied digitally using technology within businesses, particularly small businesses, has become a lot more accessible now. So we are talking about systems and processes in your business that we can have perhaps start from a trigger event, they run themselves, and that might happen on a recurring basis. That's the sort of thing we're talking about with automation. Ultimately, we want to do that to save time. Very often tasks that we can easily automate are more of those mundane tasks, the administrative tasks, creating invoices, perhaps collecting data, maybe even sending out an order acknowledgement, those sorts of things that are generally following a fairly simple, repeatable pattern. Those can, if we can automate those, we can save time. We can reduce the burden of that time on our day. It means that we can focus on our roles a little bit more focus. We reduce errors and mistakes as well, because as I said, a lot of these tasks are repeatable. And if you're collecting data or you're wanting to capture certain information, a simple typo could make all the difference. So if you can automate some of that process, then it makes things a little bit more efficient. And really what we're trying to set out here is an opportunity to work smarter, not harder. Obviously, it's a phrase which is very well used, but automation can absolutely help with that. It can also help us to build and nurture relationships, particularly from a marketing point of view. And marketing automation is something that is very common. You'll almost certainly been part of some marketing automation yourselves when you've been shopping online, those sorts of things. But it's not just about marketing. We want to think about the internal processes that we can follow and where we might be able to introduce efficiencies, not just for our customers, but for ourselves as well. The technology has to work both ways. And obviously, if we can improve our efficiency, potentially we can reduce our costs, and that means that we can grow our profit, which is only going to be a good thing. So what's the difference between systemization and automation? Let's start with that, because a system is a combination of things. It could actually be your business. Your business as a whole is a system, and it's something that helps your business run. So you can have systems within systems, but actually you then have processes that work inside the system. And as I say, you've got both of those in your business. If we were just to make a parallel, a really good example of a system is a transport system. So let's take London Transport, for example. There is a system that allows people to get across the capital, whether they're using taxi, bus, underground, overground, other train services, probably not Uber. I don't think they fit into that category. But you've got a system there, and trains will link up with other trains. You've got the underground, and you can just jump from one train to another. All that is part of the system that allows you to cross the capital. Then you've got the processes. And if we're to think of processes, we've got common processes, and then we've got more unique processes. So a common process in our transport example would be things like buying tickets. The process of someone needing a ticket, going through that process of buying a ticket, presenting the ticket, all of that is fairly common. But clearly you're going to have very different maintenance processes on a bus compared to an underground train. So that's where things start to become a little bit more granular. Now, as I said, your business itself is a system. It has a system to get inputs, and it produces outputs. But then you have an accounting system. So that's where we talk of a system within a system. And then you'll have processes where you manage your bills, your invoices that you raise, and all those sorts of things. So you've got both systems and processes in your business. And I think what's really key is that systemization, or having a system, is the start point for your automation. You don't actually have to automate things to make it more efficient. I have quite a lot of task lists. So for example, for doing webinars and recording events like this, I have a task list that I can check off. It's not automated because it's actually impossible to automate, but it's got simple things in it. Plugging my laptop into the mains, making sure that my phone is switched off. And it's a bit like having a pre-flight check. So even though you might not have automated a system or a series of processes, just by having that list to run through, it can lighten the mental capacity on you, and it makes it much easier to actually run through those steps to make sure that nothing gets overlooked. A really good example of that being done, of course, in his pilot cockpit. Your pilot will get in to fly their plane. They know exactly what they're doing. They will be doing it on a day-to-day basis. But security and safety is absolutely paramount. So they read the pre-flight checklist to each other in the cockpit, and it gets checked off. So it's a similar kind of thing. So even though you might not automate something, it can still be very worthwhile to have systems to support the process. So who's using automation? Well, some research that has been done by McKinsey and emailmonday.com says that 31% of businesses have fully automated at least one function. Now, there could be vast numbers of functions that sit within a business, and obviously the bigger the business, the more functions will exist. But some of those might be around HR, some of them might be around marketing, it could be accounts and finance, customer service, all sorts of different processes there. But 31% have fully automated at least one function. However, 38% say their organizations have not yet begun to automate business processes. So there's actually a huge opportunity to increase the level of automation, potentially improving productivity. McKinsey also found that smaller companies are less likely than larger companies to automate their processes. However, their success rate is higher. Now, I suspect part of the reason, and I don't know about yourselves, but I'm running a small business. It's very easy to take the view, oh, I'll just do it. I've always done it. It's quicker for me to do it than it is to set up the automation. That is a commonly held view. And that would be my suspicion as to why smaller companies are less likely than larger companies to get involved. Larger companies probably also have more bureaucratic processes as well. Perhaps need signing off by several different people to make sure that that process is running in the right way. But as a small business, we've actually got we can feel the benefit of that automation. If we've made the commitment to actually go through the process and set up a bit of automation, we can start and recognize the benefit almost straight away. So that is really where we can say the success rate is higher. You know, as the owner of a small business, I'm wearing a number of different hats. So if I can immediately feel the benefit that something has been taken away from me because the technology is supporting it, then I'm going to feel actually there's benefit in doing this. I'm going to automate a few other bits and pieces. And that obviously explains why the success rate can be higher. On average, 51% of companies are currently using marketing automation. Marketing automation could be really broad, to be quite honest, in terms of what that is. It could be as simple as filling in a form on your website and you get an automatic acknowledgement that says, thank you very much, we've received your email, we'll contact you within 24 hours or something like that. That is a form of automation. You are replying to the customer without having to sit there and write the message. You've preloaded, you've preloaded a message that you want to send back for a particular inquiry type, and you're setting an expectation with that customer. And 58% of B2B companies are planning to adopt more automation in their marketing. We'll come on to a couple of examples around marketing automation a little bit later on. But let's have a quick look about what actually is being automated. So, and perhaps not surprisingly, the most popular approach for automation is optimizing productivity. We talked about marketing as well a second ago. That comes in a close second. And actually, all of these sorts of tasks are really close together, but it gives you an idea of where people are focusing their effort when it comes to automation. So maximizing productivity with a view, presumably, to maximizing profit as well. But certainly efficiency within the business. Increasing marketing ROI. As I said, that example with an automatic autoresponder from your website contact form is a very simple example. There's lots more complicated examples, which again, you may well have seen yourself. You can click into a Facebook ad, you sign up on a website, you then get a flurry of automated drip emails that perhaps come through over a series of a few days, and your interaction with those is monitored. If you do one thing, then you might get another email. If you don't download a link, you get a reminder to download it. All of those sorts of things, you maybe then download it, you get another email 2 or 3 days later that says, oh, what did you think about it? We'd love one of our team to speak with you. Come and book a call here. All those sorts of things fall under marketing automation. Campaign management as well falls under marketing as well. If you're going to be running campaigns, you perhaps need to understand the data that is being collected. And like I say, you might have subsequent series of emails or similar social media even that you want to share with people who have engaged on an automated basis. Improving database quality. Housekeeping of databases is really tricky. Particularly if you're allowing people to manage some of their own information. They forget their passwords, they'll go and create a different account with a different email address, and it can be very confusing. You get lots of different people who are actually duplicating space in your database, and therefore trying to manage that housekeeping aspect of your database it can be quite challenging. So if you can find a way to automate that, that obviously saves a lot of time and means that your data is going to be more accurate. Acquiring more customers and measuring performance down there at the bottom. Clearly, acquiring more customers kind of overlaps in with your increasing marketing ROI. Of course, if you're going to be marketing, you really want to be acquiring more customers and measuring performance. So I don't know about you, but in our business, we've got collaborative workspaces, we've got time tracking, we've got spreadsheets, we've got all of these places where we can collect data. And while they all work well independently, sometimes getting them to talk nicely to each other and at least share information between them can be more challenging. I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. Now, there's a saying called high tech, high touch, because we are talking about technology fundamentally when we're talking about automation, because it's the technology that supports the automation, but it is a human process that generally, almost always, is going to sit behind that. And it's bizarre that this phrase was actually coined in 1982 by this chap, John Naisbitt. And his argument was that as humans, we look for a connected experience. And I suspect, given the events of the last year or so, we are craving for that connected experience much more, and to be able to interact with other humans, other people, our friends and family. We've missed that a lot. And just because the technology allows us to do this doesn't mean that we leave it all to the technology. We still want to be able to provide a personalized experience as much as we can. We don't really like the idea of feeling, oh, I'm just being dealt with by a robot. So being able to maintain high touch with the high tech can counter the technology and that feeling of impersonality. And the technology really, it's enabled us to have things like live chat, 24-hour chat over on Facebook and social media, all these different channels where we can interact with people. But it takes time to plan, and obviously there's a resource cost in doing so. So the point really being here that customer service has never been so accessible, because we've got all of these platforms and we've got task reminders and notifications here, left, right, and center, channels. We can encourage people to contact us through WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. But the point is that it's also never been so often unneeded. And I say unneeded because it can be so easily overlooked. We've got into the habit of having remote events or working remotely, working virtually. But I think what's really important is that we don't use that as an excuse for sitting behind a screen. Like I say, people want that connection, and it was identified by this chap back in 1982 that people want that connection. So although we can automate things, there are a number of things that we need to look out for. And studies have shown that people can see when automation is being used. And I don't have a problem when automation is being used so long as it's helpful. I had an experience with Sky TV using their live chat not so long ago. We wanted to change our subscription. It was actually quite successful. You went through what was clearly a chat bot. It was asking questions, but once I got routed through to the right place, then I was able to get the conversation going in the right direction and got the issue solved pretty quickly. And segment.com did some research where they said that 71% of consumers are frustrated when their experience is impersonal. And I think we can all empathize with that. Now, of course, automation has got no sense of time or context, so you need to be careful about specifying dates, particular dates or times. If you're going to say that, oh, we'll be back in touch with you by Thursday, that's not going to be any good if it's on a Friday, and it might put you under too much pressure if it's a Wednesday. So we've got to factor that in, and perhaps we need to be a little bit more generic or careful with what we're committing to in our language. It's really important to set out a purpose for your automation. What is it you're trying to achieve? I had another experience with live chat, and there was no bots. I was just sat there waiting for a person to reply. And there's nothing more frustrating than being on live chat, and in the background they're dealing with another 10 customers, and you're just a number. You're pretty well down the list. You've asked a simple question, and it takes 10 minutes to get an answer. And sometimes you might be lucky to get an answer. So those sorts of things are really frustrating. And what you've got to avoid is being of the mindset, oh, we've seen our competitors do it. We've seen so-and-so do it. Oh, Sky TV have got live chat. Well, that's great. But is that a reason for you to put live chat on your website as well? Because potentially with no automation, you could be letting people down. And with poorly thought out automation, you can also be letting people down and doing damage to your brand. And of course, that means the more complex the automation is, the more testing is required to mitigate the risk. And one of the things from a point of view of someone who builds websites, I always find it fascinating how people are very rarely users of their own website. And you can make the argument, well, why would it be? It's not been built for me, it's been built for my audience. But it's up to you to understand the processes that people are going through. And if you've got an e-commerce site, for example, and you take inquiries over the phone as well, people are trying to explain where they found something on your website. It's really important that you understand the customer journey, what they've been going through. So always check, once you've got automations in place, just set a reminder in your calendar or wherever else, every month or so, just go through the process so you can see that it's working and actually the content isn't sending a message that is outdated or that needs to change. So the steps to successful automation really mean focusing on people and process. And this is what digital transformation is. We talk about a transformation. It's not actually a transformation that we're looking for. And someone I remember interviewing on a podcast once said, don't like the phrase digital transformation because it really suggests that you're transforming from one thing to another. He said, a caterpillar turning into a butterfly is a transformation. What we're really looking at with digital transformation is an ongoing, a continuous evolvement and development of what you can do with the technology. But fundamentally, it's about people and processes. So you can't just put technology in place and expect it to work. There has to be a process. There's got to be an understanding of the human connection and how that works to support the process. My advice would always be to start small and build up over time. Keep it simple, silly is the KISS acronym there. You can quickly tie yourself up in knots with automation. If you've got things flying out of email platforms, MailChimp or whatever, left, right, and center, it can very quickly become confusing for you to manage. Where did I write that message? Where is that particular communication going out from? You need to keep track of what you're setting up and just build up gently rather than going all out to try and automate everything at the same time. Test them regularly. Like I said, be a user of your own website or your own services or your own processes that you've set up, and make it personal. That can be difficult because, of course, people, if they are inputting their own details, they can make mistakes. They can spell their own name wrong sometimes. And that can look like you've spelt the name wrong if you then send a campaign that says, Dear Joan, instead of John, for example. People do that. But you can use a tone of voice that is conversational, that is friendly, and it makes it feel that there's a person at the end of the process rather than it just being a machine. But my number one is technology is not a fix for poor process. That's the point to really labor here. Remember, it's about people. It's about the process that they're going through. Fix the process, then find the technology to support it. There can be arguments just to water that down slightly, but fundamentally, if you've got a poor process, technology isn't really going to fix it. If you can get the process right, then find the right technology, you'll find you get a lot more success out of it. So we're going to move on to talk about your tech stack. Now, the tech stack is sort of becoming an increasingly common phrase, but not everybody necessarily knows what it means. And it is the apps and systems and software that you use in your business. So it could be a single application. We've worked with companies that have got a big CRM or enterprise platform that's got stock, it's got the purchase orders, it's got all these different things in it. But more than likely, it's going to be a suite or combination of apps. Most companies will use something like Microsoft Office. Most companies will have some sort of accounting platform. So those are the sort of applications that we're talking about, and it includes your website as well. So here's some more examples of what might be in the tech stack. WordPress, obviously hugely common platform for websites. MailChimp, one, and I've picked out some of the really popular ones here that people will recognize, and they'll see how that fits into their tech stack and potentially for automation as well. MailChimp is a mailing platform. Xero as an accounting platform. QuickBooks is another popular one, very similar. ActiveCampaign is a CRM/automation platform, but it's also got email campaign abilities within there. Stripe is a payment platform, but it's based on technology. It's not like having a bank account. It's going and collecting payments, and you can integrate that with Xero. Shopify is an e-commerce website platform that might connect into Stripe, which might connect into Xero. You can see where I'm going with this. Slack is a live chat platform that allows people to communicate internally, and increasingly has been massively successful through the pandemic, of course, as people have been forced out to work remotely. Go Cardless integrates with Xero, and that allows you to take direct debits. Collaborative team working platforms like Teamwork, Trello, there's dozens of those. Basecamp is another one. Monday.com, who are advertising left, right, and center at the moment. All of these apps and systems, software services that you're using in your business form part of your tech stack. So why does that matter? Well, they're all cloud-based. They all sit in the cloud. You're not installing things on your particular computer. The minute you do that, you limit the ability to talk with other software and services. That was one of the major Achilles heel with Microsoft Office in its traditional format. When you got a CD that you had to install, you were installing it very specifically on your computer, and it's very difficult for security reasons and privacy reasons. You don't really want other systems and services to interact with files on your computer. Move everything to the cloud, however, and you can start and have a back channel between these different platforms. So Microsoft Office can start to communicate with things like Xero. You might have Google Workspace that can integrate with just about everything. So your email on Gmail might integrate with a CRM. So when you go into your CRM platform, you can also see the emails, or you can go to a particular contact and see the emails that were sent to that particular contact. So you'll probably have a series of different apps that all form a part of different elements of your workflow, i.e. your system within the business. And the key element now with so many of these apps is making sure that they talk to each other. And a lot of these applications will do that through something called an API. If you look on their websites, they'll have integrations. API just stands for Application Programming Interface. It is essentially that back channel that allows data to be communicated and shared between different software and services. So an API with Office 365, Xero, allows your email contact list to be found within Xero. So you're not necessarily having to switch between applications to find that. Or if you're setting up new accounts in Xero, your email addresses are accessible. So your tech stack matters because it needs to be in the cloud, and you've got to have those different apps to talk to each other as well. However, not all apps were created equally, and not everything offers an API. Some apps can be a little bit tricky to connect to. And in that case, there's these platforms called middleware, which can be the missing link. It's also possible in most cases to do custom development, but of course that starts to get a little bit more costly, a little bit more involved, and you need to be really clear on what you're wanting to achieve, because if you get that in place and then your requirements change, you're back into more custom development to amend it. So here's an example of Xero's app marketplace. As you can see, they've got dozens and dozens of different categories down the left-hand side, and some of those examples in front of you. Capsule is a CRM, HubSpot you've probably heard of, MailChimp almost certainly heard of. So all of those sorts of platforms can connect into Xero. Capsule is a CRM that we've used, and if I look on their website and I can go and find integrations, you can see I can connect that to QuickBooks, Xero, Sage, Gmail. Zapier is another one, which I'll come on to in just a second. So all of these apps, the most common apps, will have several integrations which are readily available, part of your subscription. Sometimes it might be part of a premium subscription. You've probably found a lot of these apps have free plans, and as you go into different paid tiers, you get an increasing level of service and therefore integration sometimes. But Zapier is an example of middleware, and in fact, it's not alone. So there's a couple of other platforms like Automate.io, PySync, and IFTTT. IFTTT stands for if this, then that. And that's essentially what we're saying with any automation, that we have some sort of trigger at the start of a process and there's some sort of output. So if I was to, if there wasn't an integration that's what we call a native integration that was supported on Xero, and I wanted it to connect to something, I might be able to go across to Zapier and find that there's certain options that I can set up in Zapier, essentially to mimic if this, then that. So if I add a new contact to an account, go and copy it through to my Office 365 contact list, that sort of thing. That's probably not a good example because Office 365 integrates with Xero. But let's say you were using a different sort of email campaign platform that wasn't MailChimp and it wasn't directly supported by Xero. You could set up Zapier or Automate.io, and you say, when I create a new email contact within Xero, add that person to such and such a mailing list over there. The other option which is on there is something called a webhook. That is a little bit more advanced, and that really relates to your website. So for example, if I go through an online purchase and complete a transaction, at various stages behind the scenes are these things called webhooks, where I might be able to sort of latch on to the process and take a piece of data away and go and submit that into something else. So for example, that could be a stock system. Every time I buy something, it recognizes the countdown in the website, sends that through to a stock system, and it'll update that somewhere else. So those are middleware platforms that are quite common. And Zapier in particular is probably the most common out of that. PySync has recently been bought by HubSpot, but there's a few options there that you can use if there isn't a native integration. So I'm just going to pause at that point. It's 20 to 2. We've got about 20 minutes to go. And just ask if there's any questions, if there are any queries that people want to raise at this point. By all means, just unmute your mic and shout out. I'm happy to answer any questions. All quiet. So I'm happy to move on. I think that is the general message I'm getting. So we'll carry on. All good if there's no questions. But like I say, we've got plenty of time at the end to take some Q&A as well. Oh, I've got a flashing light up here. Let's just go and have a look in the chat. What about RPA? I'm not sure I've understood that, Ben. If you want to just elaborate on that, then happy to go into some detail there. Robotic process automation, is it useful? I'll be perfectly honest with you, Ben. I'm not too familiar with the robotics side of things. I would imagine it certainly has potential to be useful, and I'm not quite sure on the context of from where you're coming from with that. In terms of, I mean, if we think about the vast range of devices now that are connected, I mean, you've got smart meters, you've got Internet of Things type devices. All of those will offer opportunities for automation. And really it's about setting the trigger point. So when something happens, it needs to trigger. It's a bit like, you've got a line of dominoes. You want to be able to identify what that trigger point is that is then going to effectively start and knock down the line of dominoes and which direction it goes. Does it fork off to the left or the right or what have you? So robotics suggests something a little bit more physical and perhaps in the manufacturing of products. I'm sure it will be. It's not my area of expertise. So I don't know if you want to elaborate. I don't know if that's particularly helpful. But any automation, so long as it's scratching an itch, as long as it's solving a problem and there's purpose and intention behind it, rather than say flippantly just, oh, let's have instant chat on our website because it seems to be the done thing, then yes, you'll almost certainly find value out of it. But I think the other key thing with setting up automations is you've got to test it. There are certain things, like in a lot of things in life, you don't necessarily know how it's going to work until you've done it. So it might be that you set it up and 3 weeks later you think, well, actually, yes, there's potential for this, but it's not quite working in the way that we want it to work. So let's elaborate and let's go back into it and see where we can improve the process or the automation. Equally, after that 3-week process, you might think, oh, well, that's not really been worthwhile. We've not achieved anything there. So naturally, this is the benefit with so many of the digital processes and things, access that we've got to the data that we can get hold of these days. It's very easy to go back and make changes because you can review progress. What do you need to consider before you start automating, Catherine? Thank you for that question. I will come on to that. I'll come on to that in a few slides' time, actually. So I'm going to carry on. Like I say, more questions are welcome, and we've got time for those at the end. But let's go into some practical examples of what you can actually automate. So I've picked out a few sort of fairly obvious ones because I don't know what level different businesses are at. And some of these may be sort of quite familiar to you. You might be doing some of these already. Some of them might be sort of quite new. So bear with me around that if there's something that you've seen or heard here. But in terms of social media, that can be quite a common one to automate. There are platforms like Hootsuite, Later, Sendable, Buffer, and Sprout. Those all allow you to plan your social posting in advance and schedule them for a particular time and date. So you can essentially create a content calendar for all your posts. You can be posting the same content to multiple channels at the same time, but potentially posting them out at different times, if that makes sense. So if you work with, perhaps you have a virtual assistant, they do a day a week, or someone who's part-time in the office and this is their responsibility, they can basically load in the week's social posting on a Monday and set those to roll out at various different stages. And they might be able to create the same content over on Twitter as they do for Facebook, for example, but set it to post out at different times. You can build a library of assets. You can have, I mean, it's not so much automation, but these are fringe benefits, if you like, from setting up the automation. So you can have a library of assets where your photos or links are all collected in the same place and they're easy to find on a consistent basis. Some of these platforms also allow you to curate content. So they can actually go out and find different content that is relevant based on particular topics or subjects that you specify. And obviously you can pull those in and be reposting those, retweeting them perhaps, depending on which channels you're using. You get a social calendar and essentially you can recycle content as well. So if you've got an active blog, for example, where you're sharing tips and advice, rather than allowing your social stream to run out, it might be that you can fall back on previous blog posts and they will automatically get recycled. So in effect, you're never going to run out. You've always got some baseline content going out across your social channels. That's what a calendar might look like. This particular platform is Sendable. So you can see there, different colors. We've got, I think on Thursday, the 3rd of December there, we had something going out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But on the Friday, there was just something on Twitter. And it's very easy to recreate those posts without having to sort of think too hard about it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that people have thinking about what to write. But actually, if you take the time to sit and spend a couple of hours, you can probably come up with some fairly decent content, topics to write about, load them in, and then you can let those run out for the week ahead or whatever time frame you're talking about. I've talked about it already, but accounting is another area where there's plenty of scope for automation. These are some of the really boring, mundane tasks that they just have to be done as part of running a business. You get bills, they come into you, you get invoices that you've got to raise. Sometimes, particularly now with a lot of services available on subscription, your mobile phone bill, it might be the same every single month. So you don't really want to be going through the motion of uploading your invoice or even printing your invoice out. I mean, it's a long time since I did that, but that's what I used to do. I used to print out all the invoices. They could go into a folder and then I'd pass them across to the accountant at the end of the year to balance everything up. But these days you take a picture of that invoice, you upload it into your Xero or QuickBooks, your cloud accounting. And if that invoice is the same or the bill is the same every month, the last thing you want to be doing is writing it out every single month. So set it up as a recurring payment or a recurring invoice, and the description, the account coding, the VAT coding, all those sorts of things, they're all preset for you. So you just don't have to worry about it. You can also set up things like payment reminder sequences. We talked about email automation. This is email automation, but within your account software, if you will. So Xero allows you to, and my experiences with Xero, I've got limited experience with QuickBooks. I have used it, but I've used Xero actually since 2009. But you can set up a sequence of perhaps emails that go out perhaps the week before the due date, on the due date, week after the due date, and then perhaps another couple of weeks after that, at varying degrees of severity, if you like, depending on how you want to get paid. But Xero allows you to collect payment by card and by direct debit. Go cardless as a direct debit provider is fantastic, absolutely superb. Highly recommend it. But 5 years ago, well, maybe a little bit longer, 6 or 7 years ago, for a small business to get a direct debit account with one of the main banks was practically impossible. But it makes it super easy to set up now, integrates directly with Xero, and you don't have the payment problems, obviously, that can be associated with just creating and sending invoices out. You can connect to reporting platforms. That might be more relevant for your accountant. But as I say, it allows you to work more closely with your accountant as well, because usually an accountant will own the subscription. They don't have to. We owned our subscription for a long time. Then we switched accountants, and now they own the subscription. So it means they've got access to the same information that we're seeing. They can pick out any anomalies, and they can alert us to those sorts of things. And ultimately, again, it's not an automation. It's a fringe benefit of going to the cloud, and we can help. We can basically be guided more accurately by our accountants and make sure that we're not overlooking anything through our accounts. So let's take a practical example with our accounts. And this is a super easy one, really simple. We can set up some inbox rules and automatically forward an invoice into Xero. So let's take, well, your mobile phone doesn't work very well because I don't know about you, but with EE, I have to go in and download the invoice every month. That is a real nuisance. It really frustrates me when there's payments going out on a monthly basis and they don't email the invoice across and I've got to go and get it. That's the frustration. But let's take Google Workspace as an example, because that's what we use. We get an invoice from them every month. It's always the same. Unless we've changed the users, but the description, the account coding, the VAT is always going to be the same. So I can just go into my email software and set up a rule that says if subject includes invoice and is sent from Google, forward onto another email address. And in Xero, we can do that. There's an email address that you can generate within Xero, and essentially you forward that email straight into Xero, and it'll do a bit of character recognition and extract the data from that into an invoice. So that can work really well if you've got recurring invoices that come through to your email address. Another example, and this is the model that we use something that used to be called Receipt Bank. Now it's called Dext. I really don't know why they've changed that. Receipt Bank seemed far more logical, but no doubt they paid a lot of money for that advice, so we'll leave them to it. But similarly, with this, I get a mobile app. So if I still get paper invoices through the post, which does happen, then I can just take pictures of those and submit them directly through to Xero. Again, you get the character recognition. I can also set up other automations within Receipt Bank. So if I can preset categories rather than extracting them. I can just have it push it straight through, so I can either approve it or not approve it, depending on the type of invoice that it is. And going out receipts, expense receipts, things like that, super easy, just to take a picture of on your phone. It uploads into Receipt Bank, does its extraction, pass it through to Xero. You've got the expense in Xero with the receipt attached. No more printing out, no more folder with hundreds of invoices at the end of the year. All makes life a heck of a lot easier. Now, I've touched on Xero a few times, but actually, you've got lots of those integrations, which I've already touched on. We've connected Xero to websites. So as and when a transaction gets completed on a website, somebody books onto a course, the invoice is automatically generated in Xero and gets sent out to the customer from Xero. That particular example is connected to Stripe. So the payment will already marked as paid when it comes through. The customer won't have actually received the money yet. It takes 3 days for it to settle through Stripe's system, but it marks the invoice as paid. And obviously it's a card payment, so it's guaranteed payment method until it drops in the account. Go Cardless, another one, easily set up. And if you've got recurring invoices or perhaps low value invoices, so for example, we have clients who host their websites with us. We might have monthly payments for those. Super easy just to set up a recurring invoice in Xero. It might be £25 a month, let's say, and it's attached to a direct debit. The mandate is we tell Go Cardless to collect the invoice 2 or 3 days before the due date. The customer gets a notification 2 or 3 days before we take the payment, and it's completely hands-free. So Xero creates the invoice on a monthly basis. Go Cardless collects the money on a monthly basis. It's literally set and forget. And all we need to do is make sure that we continue to bill for the right service level, etc., and make changes to that invoice if we need to. But once that's in place, then it's happily just running all on its own. So what can that achieve in terms of Xero? Like I said, repeating invoices collect by direct debit. You can email invoices out with a Stripe payment link, which means people can pay by card, automatically send a sequence of payment reminders, sync invoices up to web sales. I've pretty much covered all of these. Automatically add customers to a MailChimp list. Maybe sell subscription products with Stripe. And of course, from an accounting point of view, if you can reduce your average debtor days by using automation, and that's clearly good. Maintaining your cash flow is obviously key, and it can reduce input errors and incorrect account classifications if you've got that consistency, all of which your accountants will thank you for, and it means that you'll get more accurate data at the end of the year. Easier VAT returns, more profit, more time, and faster growth in a nutshell. But they also, other things that you get, I talked about fringe benefits. You're essentially, by exploring these options, you're opening up more choice for your customers. Like I say, 6-7 years ago, for us as a small business to try and get a direct debit account was practically impossible. Now we can use Go Cardless. It's free to use, free to set up, and we pay 1% with a maximum, I think it's maximum £2 on any particular transaction. So yes, it's going to be a little bit more expensive for a higher value transaction, but if it means that we just know the accounts are going to settle in automatically, I'd take that rather than feel I've got to chase it. So like I say, it allows you to potentially introduce new products, be that subscriptions, because all of these services are so accessible and they integrate with each other. And it just means that actually, if you want to run a subscription-based training course or something like that, you don't have to be sitting there every month saying, right, well, who's still in, who's out, how many invoices do I have to create, send those off. You can just set up a recurring invoice, connect it to Stripe, and that payment will automatically come through month on month. And ultimately, you can reinforce your business model by perhaps diversifying some of your revenue and how that comes through. And one thing I know I will always benefit from is fewer spinning plates. So lots of benefits just beyond simply automating a task. Let's look at a couple more examples from a marketing point of view. As I said earlier, it can simply be an autoresponder from your website. I fill a form in, it tells me, sets an expectation that I'm going to get in touch with you in the next 24 hours to respond to your query. Slightly more convoluted and complex example might be that someone fills in the form on your website, and actually what happens then behind the scenes is they're actually added to a MailChimp list. MailChimp might send out the autoresponder. There might then be a filter based on perhaps what people selected. If you've got a subject drop down in the inquiry form on your website, might be new product inquiry, it might be supply inquiry, what have you. You could then filter down those submissions in MailChimp and say, right, well, after a certain amount of time, after, let's say, a week, I want to be able to send out a sequence or perhaps just a single email that says, how did we do? What did you rate of our service? Can you come and leave us a review? Those sorts of things. Or it could be to encourage people to go deeper and explore one of your products or services in more depth, perhaps download documents and things like that, maybe even arrange a call. Meetings and appointments. This is one that I use all the time. We use Calendly, and it has just streamlined so much of my email correspondence going back and forth. Instead of saying, oh, yeah, does next Wednesday work for you? No, it doesn't. Oh, well, how about Thursday? Oh, yeah, but it's got to be after 2 o'clock. Oh, no, I can only do the morning. Just send them a link to your calendar. You've got to be careful in some cases and block things off. So it's half term next week. I've blocked half term off, so I can't be booked. But the automation just works a treat. So I send out a link in the email, a little browser shortcut, grabs the link, goes in the email, and obviously all someone has to do is follow that link, and it adds an appointment into both my calendar and their calendar. They get an email confirmation. They also get an email in the 24 hours before the due appointment, just as a prompt and a reminder, and it just cuts down on people that have forgotten that the appointment's coming, and it just makes it a lot easier to get those in the calendar. Again, you could extend that a little bit further. So in this particular example, the bottom half where I'm adding to a database, I could also be adding to a CRM system at that point. And in fact, this is exactly what we do. So as and when somebody books an appointment, they're added into a CRM system. A period of time passes by and we'll send them another email. So for example, if they've booked an intro and a discovery call, it's usually a sort of 20-minute, half-hour call where it's just to establish what it is they're looking for. Are we the right fit? Are we able to help them? So after that time period has elapsed, it's only about 5-10 minutes. We send another email out to them, and it's got a link to a video on our website. And that video just explains what it is that call is about, what sort of things they should perhaps do in advance of that call to make sure it's as useful as possible for them. But it could also go to another web page or direct them to a PDF download. So that's something that we do in our own business. Data automations, I never forget a company who shall remain nameless, they're quite a large company, and we just started working with them, and they said, oh, we need you to fill in our supplier sheet, which will get passed through to our accounts team. So they sent me a spreadsheet, which somebody had dug out of a folder somewhere, I presume, come in on an email. I then opened that spreadsheet and I found the previous company's data in there. So not great from a GDPR perspective. Now, thankfully for me, it wasn't going to go into the wrong hands, and I just deleted it. But I had to delete it, resave that spreadsheet, put it on my desktop, attach it to an email, and send it back to the company with the details on it. That could be simplified massively by having an online form either hosted with Google Workspace or Office 365. And that can submit straight into a spreadsheet. It could go directly into a document. And the example which I've extended on with Google there is you can actually do some custom coding. So this does become a little bit more complex, but it just goes to show the power of the software if you want to take it that far. I didn't want my data from a form going into a spreadsheet. I wanted it to go into a document. So it actually extracts the information, puts it into a Google Doc, and we use this method for booking our podcast guests. So I can send out a Calendly link to a podcast interview. At the same time, I send out a link to the form where they can fill in their bio, attach their photo, summary of their role and their email address, those sorts of things. And with a bit of custom code that we're able to add, that comes into a document that I can then share with our virtual assistant, who then adds the content into the website. So we're making that workflow as streamlined as possible. So we're coming up to 2 o'clock, and this is the final section now, just around planning automations before we get into Q&A. So my advice around planning your automations, I think it was Catherine that you asked this question, look at your internal and your customer processes. It can work both sides. You're not just really looking to make things more efficient for yourself. You want to make things more efficient for everyone who's dealing with you. And of course, that includes your internal teams and your customers. Think about the processes. Which are the ones that you hate doing? Which are the ones that take ages to do? What are the processes that are always following the same routine? And I've given some examples there today, which have hopefully been helpful. But really, just start with a flip chart or even a sheet of paper. If you've got a roll that's big enough, do something like this. Post-it notes and a wall. It doesn't have to even be brown paper, but use post-it notes with different colors, put them in at different angles so you can understand what the process needs to look like. What's going to be the trigger? What are the various steps along the way? And what's the output? And of course, don't forget to take a picture of it at the end because you want to be able to refer back to it at a later stage. If you're not in an office and you're working remotely or working from home or wherever, then Miro is a fantastic tool. And you can do the same sort of thing. As you can see, there's a series of post-it notes that are up on there, and you can just drag them over. You can change the color, change the text, very quickly draw arrows between them all, drop icons in from various different places. And of course, you don't have to take a photo of that. You can save it. You can export that as a PDF or what have you, save it as an image. And Miro is a free product for up to 3 boards, as they call it. But the boards are effectively infinite. You know, it's a bit like having a PowerPoint slide with no boundaries. So you can actually get loads of content into a single board, potentially allowing you to use Miro without having to pay for it. If you do pay for it and you need more access for a team, for example, I think off the top of my head, it's only about $6 per person per month. So not very expensive to use, and a really great tool to map out automations and this sort of thing. Think really carefully about the benefits that you expect. You know, what are the benefits that you hope to get out of running an automation? Equally, what's the worst thing that could happen if it goes wrong? You know, is it a really business critical automation that you're putting in place? Because if it is, you might need to have some sort of fallback, or you need to build in as part of the process that you're going to be testing it and checking it more regularly, perhaps getting a colleague to go through the process, make sure that it's working as expected. Because, for example, the last thing you want is to be getting an automation that's generating invoices for you, and if it suddenly stops generating invoices for whatever reason, you need to know about it. And bizarrely, we had an issue yesterday, which was on a client's website. Payments were collected through Stripe, and what happened was that we ended up getting multiple people, multiple transactions recorded on the site. There actually was only a single transaction been recorded, so payment was been taken only once. It looked like potentially it was been taken twice. It wasn't a problem with the payments at all. It was a problem with MailChimp, because we had a MailChimp as part of the mix. So people would complete the transaction paying to Stripe. One of those webhooks that I mentioned earlier on would divert the email address out to MailChimp, and that had broken. So it does happen. The technology let us down, and because that had broken, it prevented the next step of the visitor being returned to the website. And Stripe tries again. If it can't do it the first time, it'll keep trying until it does. And that's basically what happened. So the transaction got registered, the payment got taken, the email was broken at MailChimp, Stripe tried again, and that person got registered twice into the system. So problems do happen from time to time, and you need to be able to make sure that you can measure those and track it back as well, fundamentally. Initially, we were expecting that to be a payment issue, turned out to be a MailChimp issue. Think about what the spin-off benefits could be. You know, if you're taking the time to work through your automations, you're thinking about improving your business. So what are the other areas that this could allow you to improve your business in? Not just about the efficiency, but by choice, providing more choice to customers. And obviously that becomes a benefit of working with you, can strengthen your brand, build loyalty, all those types of things. So to summarize, we've talked about what automation is, why you might introduce automation to your business. We've looked at some of the caveats and the gotchas, some of the things that you need to be looking out for. We've talked about your tech stack and what it is that you need to look for in your tech stack. Think about think about the process before the technology, because that technology isn't always going to fix a poor process. In fact, I can't think of any instance where technology has fixed a poor process, but technology enables a good process to be great. We talked about choosing apps for your business and looking out for things with integrations and API connections. We've seen quite a few examples of automation, and we've touched on planning those automations. Again, things that you need to look out for, different approaches that you can take in terms of mapping those out. So I think there's been a few Q&A, so let me just come across to my chat here. So what do you need to consider before you start automating? Catherine, I hope I've answered that, but if not, then do feel free to come back to me. Liz says, QuickBooks does the same without using a third party. HubDoc will go get your invoices like EE. Oh, right. Okay. Every day's a school day. That's something that I will have a look at. I mean, that sounds like it's automation in itself. So that sounds like it could be really useful. Are there any other questions? By all means, unmute your microphone. Happy to take any questions that people have.
Hi, can I just ask a question? is there somewhere you can go where there's like a list of things, like, you know, if you want to do electronic signatures, or you want to automate a certain thing, where you can go and it tells you what's available? Because that's my issue. We've been looking at automation, but it's like, right, I want to do something that will automate my document signing, and there's PandaDocs, there's DocuSign, there's things like, because we're accountants, there's Practice Technician and Go Proposal, but it's like there's nowhere in one place where you can go, right, I want to do this. What software is available and which ones is the best?
Yeah, good question. It's a difficult one because, you know, invariably it's about doing a bit of homework, doing your research and finding out people's experience. One thing that I find so often is that people will say, oh, what do you recommend for a CRM? Well, my answer is it depends. Because as you've seen talking today about all the different things that you might want a CRM to do for you, Capsule, for example, is a fantastic CRM if all I want to do is track leads and conversations that I've had with people and essentially create a contacts list that has history to it. You know, it's not like an Outlook address book, but it's a contact list that's got history to it. But it doesn't do any automation, or very little automation. So while I'd recommend Capsule as a CRM, if your primary goal is that you want to be able to automate certain campaigns, then all of a sudden my recommendations shifted and it would go to something else. I mean, you will find there's lots of blog posts around these sorts of things. Your best digital signature software. You've mentioned the ones that I know of. We use PandaDoc ourselves, and that seems to work well. But again, you start and get the benefit of the integrations as you go up the subscription tiers. So, you know, you need to start and be using it on a fairly regular basis if you're going to benefit from the automations and you know, get the benefit back from the higher subscription cost. So there is an online review site called Capterra, Capterra, and they will have reviews. I did a review for Miro not so long ago, and it was very comprehensive. You know, they actually go through the process of making sure that you're actually a bona fide user and you're not just making the reviews up. So that is worth having a look at. But like I say, doing a bit of a Google around on blog posts, you will almost certainly find sort of top 5 digital signature apps for business, or even if it's a particular type of particular type of business. You know, I can go through and perhaps look at best collaborative tools for agencies or for creative businesses, and you'll find them break them down into different niches. So that would probably be my suggestion. And unfortunately, and it is unfortunate because, you know, some of these platforms do require quite a bit of a commitment, a time commitment. You know, it's great that they all offer a 14-day free trial, but actually, if you're going to set that up properly, it's going to take you a lot longer than 14 days.
Yeah.
And what you don't want to do is get sort of 6 or 8 weeks in before you've actually found, oh, it can't do what we want it to do. So it does just require a bit of an assessment in terms of where you are at now and what you want it to be doing in let's say 12, 18, even 2 years time. And will it still be a good fit for us at that point? Because you want to be making sure that you think about what your future needs are, not just what your needs now are.
Right. Yeah, I know it takes a long time. We've just done a practice like thing that gives us reminders for our practice, and just setting that up has taken 6 months, and it's still not 100% perfect. There's still missing information on it. Sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes the client hasn't given us it. But yeah, I understand what you mean. Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Any other questions? Marcus said, as a potential first step, is there an easy way to strip attachments from incoming emails and file them in Office 365? Good question. And you know, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do that. I use Office 365, but not as my primary email. We've gone down the Google Workspace route. I have noticed that if you go to your online portal in office.com, it does actually strip out your attachments and you can go directly to the files. The attachments are still actually associated with the email that they originated with, but you can go and just see the list of files. But obviously, that's not particularly helpful if you're using Outlook on desktop or something like
that. The way you were talking about with Xero having a forwarding email address that you can just forward things to and they get filed for you. I was just wondering if there's some sort of equivalent.
I don't know, to be perfectly honest, off the top of my head. Zapier or something like that would likely be a good place to start, because sometimes if you go to a tool like Zapier, you can see the terminology that's being used, even if it might not do what you want it to do. You can see some of the terminology that's been used that gives you a clue then to go and do a Google search for that particular task that needs to take place. I don't know that by forwarding an email, it's likely to extract. I mean, it could do. It could do. But you've probably got a number of steps that need to happen, because what do you want to happen to the forwarded email? You want to keep that, or are you wanting that basically to disappear into the ether, but extract the attachment?
I'm just thinking in terms of when members of staff get emails, that then the attachments end up sitting in an inbox on their personal system.
Yeah.
If you had something that you could forward on and it would just go into a customer file.
I mean, that's where some of these collaborative workspaces can work well, like Monday.com. We use Teamwork ourselves, but I've used Asana as well, Basecamp. They all have the option to forward emails in, and they will extract and save the attachment as a file within the system. It'll also capture the message as well, but not everybody uses those types of platforms. But that's something that we've got quite a lot of experience with, where the last thing I want is stuff to be stuck in my inbox, because it means that I've got to deal with it. And I've got my do, ditch and delegate list. So if I can forward that into Teamwork and assign that to someone else in the team, or at least make them aware that it's there so that they know, then that's how I tend to work with that sort of thing. Again, depending on the type of file it is, but you might be able to upload it into a particular file location, then just put a comment against the file to notify someone else that it's there. That could be ways of dealing with it. Setting up a file system, whether it's on OneDrive or Google Drive, perhaps where you've got folders broken down by client name. Maybe you put a folder within there specifically for attachments. There may well then be a way to automate it, but that's a really good example of thinking about the technology not being a fix for the poor process, because that process absolutely has to come first in that case. You need to know what you're going to do with the content, what you're going to do with the message, how are people going to access it before you then start and apply the technology. Simply filing those emails and doing something that puts the attachments in a common space, that may be great, but people then need to be notified, presumably, that those attachments are there and the information is available.
Okay, thank you.